Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Glad to have with us on our live line this morning, Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker. Brooks Baker, thank you for calling in.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brian. Good morning.
Well, let's start out with drug issues in Steuben County. What are the big problems these days? What's the biggest drug issue that you're dealing with?
Well, clearly the opioid problem remains a real problem for us here in Steuben County. We're continuing to see overdoses. We have our Sheriff's Department and State Police regularly employing Narcan to save people. We've had a fatal overdose in almost monthly now since the year has begun, and doesn't seem to be stopping. So people are still selling a very regularly spiked fentanyl-laced heroin that's killing our residents, and that is obviously the most concerning because it's the most deadly. There are other things out there that are being problematic and are growing, that are rising the levels of law enforcement concern. But obviously, as a deadly epidemic, the opioid situation is still very real here in Steuben County.
I've often heard from people like, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano or State Senator Tom O'Mara that the opioid problem is not specific to any age group or demographic. Do you find that to be the case with the people who die in these fatal overdoses? It could be anybody, any age?
Absolutely. We have the Sheriff's Department has deployed Narcan on children as young as infants who've accidentally gotten their parents' drugs, and people in their 50s. I have talked to parents who've lost children who have master's degrees, to folks who are college students who are sort of relatively new to using this kind of stuff, to dyed-in-the-wool addicts, to folks, rich, poor, educated, uneducated. It doesn't matter. These drugs do not discriminate. They addict everybody, and they kill everybody they addict. It's a terrible, terrible scourge on our community.
So how common is it to see someone accidentally stumble onto the opioids and not even intending to take it, but to stumble onto it, to accidentally touch it and get sick, as you mentioned in your answer there?
Well, it is not uncommon. We've had a sheriff's deputy get sick during a search. This stuff is so potent that it's not the heroin itself, but it's what they're lacing it with. It's this deadly substance, fentanyl, and something even worse called carfentanil, which is a synthetic drug manufactured to behave the same way. And those drugs are so powerful that even a little bit of contact with your skin, something the size of the head of a pin on your skin, can cause sickness and even overdose. And we've had a couple of our deputies suffer from that. The Sheriff's Department and State Police have had to change the way they deal with even field testing these substances because it is so deadly and dangerous. And that's what happened to an infant in this situation, and that can happen to anybody. So this stuff it doesn't just affect those who are intending to take it, but it can hurt anybody who has contact with it. That's what makes it so deadly and so dangerous.
Now, this carfentanil, this isn't the first I've heard of that. Is this something that school resource officers are running into as well?
I don't know that they're seeing that very much, and we have been, sort of knock on wood, relatively lucky that we have not seen our real opioid use trickling down too terribly much into high schools. We're seeing pills there primarily. The population, I think, is being hit hardest by carfentanil use and with our heroin users, who are sort of an 18 to 24-year-old crowd. But it is certainly reaching up to older levels, and it scares me to death that it may reach down into our high schools. We're doing our best to keep that out with some of the programs that we have in the county right now.
And moving on from heroin and fentanyl, unless there was anything else there that I missed, was there anything else you wanted to say on heroin and fentanyl?
No, I think that's just it is something that there's lots of resources for help out there. One thing I would like to emphasize is that if someone is affected by these substances and by this addiction, reach out to law enforcement. We're there to help. We are doing our best to push people into rehab when we can. There are good Samaritan laws that protect people who report and who are caught using this stuff. Our goal is to help those who can be helped and to take those who deal out of our community.
Tell us a little bit more about the Good Samaritan laws for those who might not be familiar with them.
Sure, the Good Samaritan law is a law that says that if somebody is in extremes, they have utilized drugs and they are sick, they may be overdosing. One of the things that keeps folks from getting medical attention is they're afraid of being arrested if they report that. There's a Good Samaritan law out there that says if you are sick and overdosing, or if someone with you is sick and overdosing, and you call law enforcement or you call emergency responders for help, then you cannot and will not be prosecuted. It's to open the door to help people survive overdoses. So if you come across somebody who is sick, or you're in a situation where somebody uses drugs and they become ill, they are beginning to overdose, or they are overdosing, you can call for emergency response and get them help without worrying about being arrested.
Talking to Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker. District Attorney, what about other drugs? I'm guessing the next drug that you're having a problem with these days, and this is just a guess, is methamphetamines.
Brian, that's a very good guess, and we're seeing methamphetamine come to us in different ways now. It's still something which is homemade. A lot of it is being produced here in our own community by local folks, and it still remains incredibly dangerous. We have in the last month, in search warrants in Lindley and in Corning and in Bath, stopped a number of meth labs in production. In Corning, one of the folks in production was badly burned. We still haven't caught him yet, but that's a situation. These things explode. They hurt people, and they remain a threat. The rest of the apartment building he was in had to be evacuated. A lot of folks were put at risk, and that's a regular situation. I think that's something that we see here all too frequently, is somebody in a multi-unit dwelling making methamphetamine, and things go bad, and next thing you know, the neighbors get sick, or we have to evacuate several houses because of what's going on. So that remains a problem in our community. I think because of the reduction in the availability of opioid pills in particular, methamphetamine has increased. We are also seeing an increase in what's called crystal meth, which is it's just sort of a different color methamphetamine that is produced elsewhere and shipped into our community. It largely comes out of Mexico, and we're seeing more and more of that being trafficked here by people from outside our community, selling it here, much as heroin or cocaine has always been sold here.
On the topic of meth labs, Brooks Baker, are meth labs more commonly found in more country, rural areas so that the giveaway smell does not get noticed and reported by the neighbors to law enforcement?
Brian, that used to be the rule. When the meth epidemic first started hitting us, these things were generally found in rural areas, campsites or up in the hills someplace off a seasonal access road or something like that. These days, we're finding meth labs everywhere. We are finding them in apartment buildings. We're finding them in people's garages. Oftentimes, we're finding them working in cars, even people riding around on bicycles with them in backpacks. The production has become so prolific that we're seeing it just about everywhere. So I've always told folks to be aware of funny smells, particularly in the woods, or people walking in the woods, hunters, that kind of thing, looking at soda bottles with funny materials in them, or things that look like collections of blister packs from Sudafed and camp fuel, that kind of stuff that might say, hey, you're in the area of a meth lab, call somebody. But now, if you're in your apartment or you're in your house or you're even in a parking lot and something smells funny, a chemical smell, I think they sort of say kind of like cat urine. I hate to use that kind of verbiage first thing in the morning, but that's a common way to describe it. If you're picking up that kind of smell and you're not feeling good, call somebody, because the reality is meth is being made almost everywhere these days.
Talking to Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and continue our conversation. In segment 2, we're going to talk about the domestic violence case with the stabbing in Campbell, and we're going to talk about other current cases in Steuben County Court. Stay with us.
Hello, this is Brian O'Donovan, President and CEO at St. James Hospital. I would like to provide some exciting updates that are happening here.
We've expanded x-ray and blood draw services at the new medical office building, 7309 Seneca Road North. X-ray is open Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. and weekends at 10 a.m. Blood draw is open Monday through Saturday at 7 a.m. Just walk in. I welcome your feedback. Please feel free to contact me at 607-324-8113. Thanks.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Hey, Rob, how's it looking for today, tomorrow, the next day?
Well, it's kind of looking the same, Brian. A lot of cloudiness and the potential for some showers. The upside to the forecast is now that with high pressure off to our east, the winds are southwesterly, so we're going to be pumping lots of mild weather our way, and temperatures go above normal between now and Saturday. Then they're going to fall below normal Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday with the passage of a cold front through the area. A lot of cloudiness already moving into the southern tier. It will continue to do so. Based upon the radar right now, we've got some showers stretched out on the north side of Lake Ontario back to east of Detroit. We could see those move in later this afternoon. We're going to be about 50 to 55. Sunrise this morning, Brian, was at 6:58. It'll set tonight at 7:32. We'll have showers crossing the region overnight. Lows will be somewhere between 35 and 40. Tomorrow, chance of showers in the morning, otherwise cloudy, mild, 50 to 55. Showers return tomorrow night, 40 to 45. We'll have periods of rain Saturday, 55 to 60, then turning sharply cooler for Sunday, Brian.
Back with Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker. Brooks Baker, I want to talk about the domestic violence situation there with that case over in Campbell. But before we do that, was there anything else that I did not bring up on the drug problem in Steuben County that you wanted to discuss?
But the only thing that I guess I would add to this is that as a community, we're coming together in ways we never had before to fight the epidemic. The COPE program, which we began a couple of years ago, which is cooperative among and across the county, is doing some really neat things. We're doing some great stuff to keep kids off drugs. Hornell, in particular, has picked up a youth court program, which is phenomenal. I think it will involve a lot of kids in setting the norms for their own community and hopefully reduce drug use. The sheriff is emphasizing treatment in the jail. We are creating a community impact program, which will bring a treatment message to people who are just getting into the criminal justice system, who have drug and alcohol issues. We're re-emphasizing our drug courts. It's an across-the-board effort. It's a problem, but that's why I'm asking the community in each one of those segments to call in, because this is a community fight. We're trying at all levels, treatment, enforcement, and education, and having our community involved is critical to maintaining our community as what it is and keeping drugs out.
District Attorney Brooks Baker, our guest this morning. Moving on to that domestic violence case in Campbell. How many times was the victim stabbed in the neck? What was it, something like 9 times?
Brian, again, we're still in the infancy of that investigation. My understanding is there were at least 6 stab wounds inflicted. I can't talk about the evidence a whole lot at this point because we're still developing as we go forward, but clearly this was an intentional act. This was not. This was a brutal, vicious attack by Mr. Rideout, and it's a situation where our victim remains in guarded and critical condition with some really horrific injuries.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely terrible. What other cases do we have in the court system over in Bath these days?
Well, there are, as always, we have a lot of cases going on. Some, we're about to try another very difficult, kidnapping, domestic violence situation. That's coming up to trial relatively soon. We have a lot of drug cases pending. Right now, we are relatively lucky. We don't have, it's been a couple of years of murder case after murder case after murder case. We're very lucky not to have one of those pending right now, particularly after what happened in Campbell the other night. We do have, unfortunately, a couple of difficult vehicular homicide cases, which we've been lucky to avoid over the last few years, but we do have the case involving Mr. Hill from Lindley, who was killed driving his motorcycle in Campbell, and Mrs. G down in the town of Addison. So we have some, that's kind of the mix of stuff. We have our usual collection of cases. Our numbers are up. As a byproduct of the opioid epidemic, we have a collection of collateral crime that goes with it. Property crimes, domestic violence, child abuse, all of those things increase, so that the numbers that we had in our county for indictments last year were up about 25% over 2017, and so far in 2019 they're running about the same. And I would attribute that back directly to drug use. I think the sheriff has indicated to us that through his intake program, about 80% of the folks sitting in Steuben County Jail have drug issues, and the more drug issues, the more crime, the more things that we have to deal with. So our numbers are up, unfortunately, and as we work on the drug problem, hopefully they'll go down. Obviously, job numbers are good for us to hear because the more folks are employed, the less will be out doing the wrong thing.
On that issue that you just mentioned, how difficult is it? Is it getting any easier for people who have drug histories to get employment?
I don't know. The biggest issue is simply being clean and passing a drug test. When I talk to local employers, and I've been to a forum at Corning Community College and some other situations, we have a need to hire people here in Steuben County. I think it's not so much having a drug history. I think a lot of, particularly the way we're dealing with a lot of people with drug situations now, trying to minimize their criminal liability if they have a real drug problem, and we can get that resolved. But the issue is a lot of folks can't pass a drug test, and that's really, really frustrating for local employers. That's one of the byproducts of this drug issue that is sort of unseen here, is that employers can't find workers because one of the conditions of employment is having a clean drug test. And so many folks are using, even recreationally, that they can't pass those tests and can't become employed at some very good paying jobs with large local employers.
District Attorney Brooks Baker, in a previous answer you mentioned that you have some kidnapping cases that are being tried for Steuben County. I wanted to ask you about one in particular. There was a case back in November, and there were two female victims kidnapped in Alfred Station. So it starts in the kidnapping situation started in Allegheny County. The suspect was a man from Cuba named Stephen Cox. That chase went all the way down into Pennsylvania, and Steuben County State Police and Sheriff's deputies were involved with that. I'm sure you're very familiar with what I'm talking about. Wondering, any update on the Stephen Cox case? Is the Steuben County court involved? Was he charged for anything in Steuben County? Does Stephen Cox of Cuba have to answer to anything in Steuben County?
Ultimately, we did not charge him here in Steuben County. The chase and pursuit did lead through Steuben County, and as you mentioned very accurately, members of our law enforcement from the Sheriff's Office and New York State Police were involved in his apprehension, ultimately in Pennsylvania. The crime is, there are two crimes that took place. One is the kidnapping, and one is some damage that took place during the chase down in Pennsylvania. They're being prosecuted in Pennsylvania and in Livingston County. I don't know the status of those cases right now. I know there are active prosecutions. I do not believe it's been resolved as yet. Here in Steuben County, we did not charge. He was simply passing through, and everything that happened here can be tacked on to either what happened in Livingston or in Pennsylvania, and it makes more sense to be prosecuted as part of their continuing crime situation. It's either the flight from or the actual offenses. So they're everything that happened was actually charged in those two locations, not charged here in Steuben County. And there are some jurisdictional rules that allow that to happen. So,
kidnappings. I wanted to ask you about them. Are they often drug-related or stalker-type issues on the part of the kidnapper? Somebody doesn't want their husband or wife to leave. What's the deal with those?
Well, one, they aren't that frequent, but the reality is it's usually both of those things, Brian. We dealt with a kidnapping situation in Hornell that's still working its way through the courts, where someone was kidnapped to try to get him to pay more money for drugs as part of a drug operation gone bad. And that happens from time to time. It's relatively infrequent. That's more of a kind of a Rochester issue. We've heard about there was a young man from the University of Rochester who was kidnapped by drug dealers to try to get more money out of him. You wander into that world and start dealing with drug dealers, and bad things can happen. They really don't care how they get their money, whether it be through kidnapping or through selling drugs. What we see more frequently is a domestic violence situation, where, much as you accurately put it, somebody is stalking someone they have been connected to for some reason. They don't want to let them go, or they're upset with something they have done, or maybe they're dating somebody else, and they want it's a control issue, much as all of domestic violence is. It's the offender trying to control the victim. We just dealt with one of those down in Lindley, where a gentleman crashed into his girlfriend's car, took her hostage, and held her at his house for several days because she didn't want to engage in a romantic relationship with him anymore. That's very similar to the situation that's working its way through the courts here right now that I mentioned earlier. So that's unfortunately, a lot of these do come back to domestic violence situations, where you have an offender who wants to control a victim, and if he can't do it through means other than physically taking control, he does.
For people who are victims of domestic violence who might hear this, what's out there for support in Steuben County?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of support. One, reach out to law enforcement. You can call the district attorney's office, the Steuben County Sheriff's Office, or the state police, and we'll point you towards resources. The state police have a victim advocate who can do some great things. So if you call, they'll get you in touch with Lisa Funke, who works for them. Arbor Development is a not-for-profit corporation in Steuben County, which oversees the VAWA grant, which is a Violence Against Women Act, and they have every resource available. They have people who can help forward you through the legal system, both in family court and in criminal court. They have funds for shelter. They actually have shelter locations where somebody can go, can be secure, and get out of their home and live someplace if they are a victim of domestic violence. Obviously, law enforcement can help you get to those things, and law enforcement can step in between the victim and the offender. So if someone is suffering from a domestic violence situation, or you know someone who is, or reach out to local law enforcement, reach out to the DA's office. There is a hotline. You can find it online. It's in the yellow pages. You look for the net, and they will find you the services you need to help reduce the risk of the situation and get out of the situation.
With that, we have to leave it, but I have to say this has been very interesting. Learned a lot this morning talking to Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker. Thank you for joining us.
Ryan, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.